How you doing today, Andrew? Let everybody know, welcome to the Middle Ground Mike. Let everybody know, introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm Andrew Davey. Currently, I'm a practicing mental health counselor. Previously, I'd been a teacher. I had a ruptured brain aneurysm in 2018 that I've recovered well from. It was also my mother's primary caregiver when she was diagnosed with ALS in 2022. I write fiction and nonfiction in my spare time. It's been a very interesting time in the last decade.
Counseling. So I've done a couple episodes on men's mental health. I'm getting some women out here, so it's the first guest that I've gotten. But so like when I talk about like mental health, like in today's day and age, I can imagine just from like your perspective, like where like the challenges come in for some of the things that like you've seen that just I guess compared to the way quote unquote was back in the day, versus like now because it just seems like and I know there's less technology and life was a tad bit simpler, 50 years ago, right? But it just seems like these days people have a hard time processing like just the basic fact that we got to get up and go to work to pay the bills and put food in our mouths. And I'm not knocking anybody. It just seems like that is a lot more like 50 years ago people felt that way. They were able to cope, handle it, however you want to label it, versus now.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly the landscape has changed a lot. I think also the goals that people had, 50 years ago were you would want to be on a more specific path.
Mm-hmm.
The objectives were sort of similar across the landscape. Most people would want to have the spouse and the children and the car and the dog and the cat and the white picket fence and the 2.5 children. And I think in time that's changed. And I think it's much more acceptable now to not necessarily go to college immediately after you graduate high school, which I think was sort of the goal for everyone. So there have been a lot of changes. I think technology has been really wonderful in allowing people to communicate well and find information quickly, but I think we're not used to the effect that has on someone. I think most of what I see in counseling today is a lot of anxiety that comes from people not having the social interactions that were common, like when you and I were growing up. I certainly played a lot of video games, but I also spent a lot of time outside
Yeah, and if
talking
you
with people.
and if your friends wanted to play, they had to come over. You had to go over there. It's that face to face, like that, the sound of the voice, the facial expressions, the back and forth. It's kind of like what I told someone. You can reason with someone when you're talking to them in person, or you can see their facial expressions. It's just because you start to see and understand different things. It just changes the context.
Yeah, there's a disconnect now that hadn't been there before, and I think we're moving so quickly in developing technology that we're not used to the effect it's having on us. So I think that's where a lot of the disconnect comes from. And I agree with you. There is a huge difference between being able to talk to someone face to face as opposed to doing it, on a screen or asynchronously where it's not happening at the same time. So,
Yeah, it affects everybody. Even my son who's autistic, when he's around, like now he's getting used to things, wants to talk to people. When he does that, now all of a sudden the that he sees other kids don't wear pull ups. Now he wants to be potty trained. So it's that interaction that made him go, "Hey, mom and dad are right," rather than him looking at us going, "He's 6 and just now wants to get out of him," but just looking at us going, "Yeah, that's your problem."
yeah, well, there is something fundamental that develops from interaction with other people that I think sometimes we miss out on. Obviously, it's much easier when you can afford to use technology to do something, but there is a trade-off. I think we're sort of recognizing what that trade-off is right now. And some people have difficulty just managing that.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean it's so common with that difficulty of that these days, and it's um like social media is a very good tool, but I feel like it's something that maybe in early elementary that they need to have like a way to get parents engaged with the kids at the school or something of that nature to kind of go, hey, this is how you should handle yourself and when people do things, not just say it, in a quick 3-second sound bite or a 5-second lesson, like actually like a several weeks or maybe like a semester, like somehow. And I feel like that would help some of these kids because, us growing up, we went from analog to digital where you kind of had emails and message boards to, it just kind of progressed. So You kind of got to, I don't want to say get used to it, but you just learned how, like, and plus back then, if somebody had a problem with you, they just told you. They just said it. They didn't go online and then say it and then all of a sudden like start going crazy,
Yeah, well,
getting violent.
it's difficult these days for kids to comprehend. When I was growing up, if you did something embarrassing, the worst thing that would happen is someone would take a Polaroid of you in a compromising position. Now, if you do something that you regret, it's there forever. And
I know.
I'm not sure kids can comprehend the gravity of
Right.
that at their age,
I mean,
sort of.
thank heaven to my dad's patience and them not having cell phone cameras back then because,
Yeah, no, that's a universal thing that everyone is grateful for from if you grew up in the 80s and 90s.
yeah, it's just, not that I did anything ever like horrendous, but I did a lot of things I'm pretty sure my father might have crawled out of his skin and beat me to death for.
Sure, sure.
Yeah. Hey, don't skip school. Yeah, no problem. He would drop me off, and they had these little phone. It was like weird. They had like this vestibule of like phone booths at the high school. He would drop me off. I'd wait for him to drive down the street. I'd pick up put I think it was like 25 or 35 cents and call myself off saying I was my dad, hang it up, and then go across the street into a neighborhood to a friend's house. Thank God my dad never figured that one out. And
Sure.
even if he did, he didn't have a problem with it because woof. But nowadays, your friend would be on TikTok, or Snapchat, whatever, going, hey, look at, we're skipping school, everybody.
Well,
Not thinking about how that would hurt them.
yeah, I mean, when I was teaching middle and high school students, we tried to encourage them to be good digital citizens. That was the phrase we used. And one of the seminars we had, there was someone who talked about how a student had just been accepted to a university, and while they were in a meeting in the auditorium, were tweeting about how boring the meeting was. So the administrators were checking Twitter at the time and saw that and rescinded the um, the acceptance. There are a lot of really great examples that you can use, but just whether or not that's going to connect, whether or not a 17-year-old is going to understand the gravity of what that situation means.
Yeah, I experienced that with my 15-year-old. He's in band. I think he's up to, he can play 8 different instruments. The one technically has Asperger's. I mean, he's like, he just picks, he can write his own music. He just picks everything up and just runs with it. I mean, like, he learns at such an astronomical rate. But so where like that is, he didn't understand certain things, right? So to him, he was like messaging some of these girls that he goes to high school with, or that were like in technically, he's ninth grade, they were eighth grade, but they like meshed like certain parts of it so the eighth graders could get like exposure to the ninth grade band and choir and all that. And there was a young lady that was kind of, I guess, apparently holding her instrument wrong, like trying to play it. And he said, hey, you got to put your finger here and here so that way you don't struggle. Well, she was a little uncomfortable with that. And, then he was like, the teacher was like, well, I know you guys all text each other, this, that, and the other thing. Teacher pulled them into a room. And where I guess I probably had an issue with it, where I feel like it put my son in a position why some of these kids don't know how to handle it, is the teacher never contacted us. And, he had tried to insinuate without saying, well, this could have been considered sexual harassment. And I'm going, well, first, if that's something you think, you should include the parents right away, considering I picked my son up right after he talked to him and he seen me. But that's whatever. But where that kind of, for me, it ties in the social media thing, is like, where my son didn't understand, like, hey, even though that person's literally only a year younger than you, and if you're an adult, nobody would think twice. It's that you're in high school, she's in middle school, and you guys are all in a Discord channel together sending messages. And I don't think he understood like the gravity of that. Nothing that was there would have been anything that would got him necessarily in trouble. But they were, saying things that young kids say that maybe probably shouldn't have been said. Like he had a hard time in his mind. It took me like an hour to get him to show me, because in his mind he's like, I feel like I did something really bad, but I don't want to show it, And he just didn't realize, like, hey, these things you guys do today can come back and haunt you for the rest of your life. I said, if something like that would have been construed the wrong way, it could kill your ability to do anything with band further down the road, and it would derail something you've excelled at. And I think that that's where technology, like, really, it hurts kids at that point. I wish we could somehow get it like, how kind of is like a car, something that you didn't operate until you were a certain age by yourself. I don't think that'll ever happen, because I just don't think that's a reality. But from like your perspective, how can parents just in general, like, hey, and especially being counselor, and then being a teacher, you definitely have a unique perspective in terms of like how can some of these people like maybe give their kids like guidance or being like, hey, I seen this, not that type of thing, like I seen this is what I noticed when my kid was having trouble, or just basic things, because that stuff leads into a lot of issues that other kids have in school now.
Well, I think really the only thing you can do is just be aware and involved. Everyone is going to make mistakes and everyone is going to
Oh yeah.
make bad choices, but really just I think the more you can know what's happening and be present in the moment, that's really the best kind of support you can give.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, because it's just these days, back when we were growing up, it was be seen, not heard. Do what you're told, or it's going to be World War III in your house. And as traumatic as that is, obviously I'm not like that with my children, my sons. I mean, they definitely know there's a line not to cross. Like, hey, it's a very long line. They can pretty much almost get away with murder, but it was just. But now I hate when people call it like gentle parenting, because I think that's just degrading to people who are trying to be in, I won't say be in touch, but like understand really what's going on. We were growing up, it was, well, your feelings don't really matter. Just, suck it up, man. So that's just, I could go on about that kind of stuff all day, and then, so, kind of switching gears a little bit is, I seen you had said you were writing a book or a documentary film, I'm sorry, about a middleweight boxing champion.
Yeah, I had been a fan of the sport growing up, and I was a theater major in college. So
Awesome.
they didn't have a film program at the school I attended. So I became a theater major, but I had wanted to be a filmmaker when I was much younger. And there was a former boxer named Iran Barkley. He was a middleweight who had his heyday in the 80s and 90s.
Okay.
And I saw that unfortunately at the time he was selling dinner with him. You could bid on dinner with him on eBay. And it was going to be in New York where I was living at the time. So I bought the dinner. And then over dinner, I suggested, you have a very interesting life story. I would love to make a film about it. So for about the next year, he and I attempted to make a film about his life. And then we had a falling out about money and about the I think he wanted to bring in somebody to take over. So I ended up writing about the experience that'll be coming out in a collection of essays that I will be
Nice.
publishing soon. So the documentary was never actually released.
Okay.
Just so this is also my timing was that this was before all of the streaming services had been invented. So, really, the only hope I had was that maybe I could sell it to a DVD distribution company, or perhaps HBO might be interested, or MTV, or something like that. But it never got to the point where it was ever completed.
Well, that's a bummer. Yeah, I mean, I'll say one of my favorite boxes of all time, if not my favorite, is Butterbean. I don't know if you've seen any of the stories of his recovery once he started doing that Diamond Dallas Page yoga.
No,
Did you?
I mean, I haven't. I'd only just seen him during his heyday.
Yeah, he had gotten to a point where I believe he had like kind of like crutches or and like a walker. His body was just so bad, and he started doing this thing. It's like Diamond Dallas Page yoga. It's like he's a former wrestler. I don't know if you know who he is, but he and then
Sure,
now,
DD.
yeah, he gets around. Beings walking on pretty much like almost like a normal person, trains and everything. Yeah. I was just like, I'm like, wow, man, to go from that to that, that's just wild. How did you feel about that Mike Tyson fight last year? I was so disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really, a lot of people who, like, I remember Sugar Ray Leonard talking about the reason why he kept coming back. He retired like 3 or 4 different times and kept coming back. And I think when if you're a musician or you're an artist or you're somebody who's used to the adulation of fans like that, that's a drug that you really can't find anywhere else. So I sort of don't fault Mike Tyson for coming back,
Oh yeah, no, no,
for wanting to capture that glory again. As a fan of the sport, I wasn't really interested. But yeah, I mean it was disappointing on a lot of levels to think that to see him in that position.
yeah, he looked like he looked like worse than he would just walk around on a normal day. Like I like the videos that they were posting, of how fast he was moving. Like I get that's training, but man, if you had like that energy level right now, I felt like it would just been it would have been an actual fight.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why he was picked as the opponent too. I mean, this was,
Right. It
wasn't.
was staged
Yeah, it was
to a degree. Yeah.
never going to be competitive. Um,
Right.
so there is sort of a disappointment seeing somebody who, in their prime, was one of the best of all time.
It would have annihilated Jake Paul.
Right, of course. So there is it is unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I remember just watching Mike Tyson and Butterbean. They just, they would just look like somebody's like whomping them, and then they would just get some. I mean, well, Mike Tyson pretty much always dominated. Let me rephrase that. Butterbean sometimes would look like somebody's getting to him a little bit, and then he would just, one or two shots, and boom, there goes that person. He had that ability to just change the fight with one shot. And for the most part, Mike Tyson pretty much just would dominate from A to Z. Not always, but most of the time. Kind of like Floyd Mayweather, except for the difference is Mike Tyson wasn't fed his fighters. He actually fought guys that were on his level. Floyd Mayweather, a great boxer, he always seemed to get guys that were, you're like, man, this guy's going to kill him. A lot of seemed like the guys that would have made it a competitive fight somehow didn't really get in his line of vision too often, which I think he would have won a lot of them. It would just been nice to see him do it, but I'm sure we could talk about boxing all day. The good old days of, sports in the 90s were a little bit different. The talent was there. Feels like now MMA is kind of taken over. I don't know if you're a fan of MMA or not. I'm 50-50. I can watch it, but it doesn't, like, I don't sit there and have to watch it.
Yeah. No, it's been a while. I sort of segued out of, I would watch boxing pretty regularly, and now I don't really
Yeah.
follow any sport that much.
Yeah. The only sport I really follow these days is the NFL. I'm a diehard Detroit Lions fan.
Gotcha.
I had season tickets for years, and then they have 2 seasons where they do good, and all of a sudden they raise their prices higher than the Eagles. And I'm like, the Eagles could raise their prices because they've won a Super Bowl. You haven't won a Super Bowl. Why are you more expensive than them? And at that point, I was like, you know what? I'll still go to a game or two, but yeah, I'm not paying $5,000 for season tickets. I can't afford that. That's a little bit above my budget. Because my wife kind of looked at me when I got that bill, and she's like, "Are you really considering that?" And I'm like, "Well, naturally, but I know that that's just not a reality." But yeah, kind of like just going back. One thing I noticed that you said is you taught abroad, middle and high school, and then did you teach in Hong Kong?
I did. I was in graduate school for creative writing,
Okay.
and I was able to teach undergraduate classes while I was in school. So I thought that that's where I was introduced to teaching, and I thought that could be a career path for me. And I had this idea that as soon as I started my teaching career, I would wake up one day and be retiring in my 60s and have taught for the last 35 years or so. My thought was, well, let me see if I can go abroad and perhaps teach abroad. And that will be an experience that I'll always have, that I can look back on fondly, that I did while I was able to. So I was able to apply for, and I got a Fulbright teaching assistantship in Macau. So I went to Macau for a year and taught at a university there. And when that ended, thought, okay, well, this will be easier to stay now. I really enjoy being in Asia. So I was able to move to Hong Kong and get another position there for about a year. So I spent about 2 years abroad teaching at the college level, which was wonderful.
Heck yeah. So like talking about that, how would like a message for American students maybe that you have that would from like what would maybe knowing both cultures as because you've lived here, grew up here, being over there, what would some maybe Americans be able to do, like young Americans in school, college, that they could do to maybe give themselves an edge?
I'm not. I mean, well, I don't know about an edge necessarily. I mean, it's interesting because the focus on education is different in both countries. At least when I was the last time I was teaching here was 2018,
Okay.
and I was teaching in Asia in 2013, 2012. It's been a while. I would say the socializing piece, I think, it gets a little bit more focus in the United States. Just learning sort of how to do that. whereas in Asia it tended to be the subject matter and sort of the assignment completion. So perhaps shifting the focus a little bit. I think it's really important to learn how to be social in school and how to be able to communicate effectively. So perhaps the edge would be hitting the books more often.
Yeah, I mean, it's because it's always just always different perspectives, right? I mean, that's I know that I believe don't in most Asian countries people go to school all year round or most of the year.
I think so. I don't really recall. I mean, I remember there was a summer program happening. I wasn't, I'm not sure if that was mandatory or not,
Okay.
but I think, I mean, and this was at a community college.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. I've always heard that, and I'm like, oh man, that would not fly in the United States. You'd be hard pressed to get people to go to school here all year round. It's just not our culture, That's just it's not even necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that would not work out very well with just how we operate,
Sure.
vacations, family. I mean, Europe's very similar in that aspect. Their school year is a little bit longer, but they're real big on, but they also have like crazy amounts of holidays in their school year, so they go a lot longer. No, that's just it's cool to hear some of that, because I know like Hong Kong is still, well, not is still, but was for a long time, very heavily influenced by the British, in their culture. So, that's like, is that when you were there, is that still something that was kind of like a thing, or had they kind of shifted, or?
It had, by the time I was there, it had, I mean, it was still very international. So there are three main sort of locations in Hong Kong. There's Hong Kong Island, which I sort of equate to like Manhattan. It's
Hmm.
where you have all the skyscrapers and all the business takes place. It's where it caters to the expat community mostly.
Okay.
Then you have Kowloon, which is kind of like Brooklyn. So it's still very much international and a lot of expats, but you're beginning to get more varied, not as many skyscrapers. And then the new territories is much more suburban. So that's when you get out to the new territories, it's the biggest part of Hong Kong.
Okay.
So that's where fewer people are going to speak English. You're going to run into more people who just speak Cantonese. That's actually where I lived in the new territories when I was teaching. So
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah, I got less of the expat experience.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious because I mean I know I remembered, I believe, what was it, in 2000 that the British gave up control of Hong Kong?
I think it was 90.
97. Okay. Yeah, I just remember it being like it was like a big deal. They had like Hong Kong had like fireworks and all sorts of stuff. And I just remember seeing it on TV going, man, I didn't really realize another country still ran Hong Kong. I was just heard Hong Kong was like a zone or whatever in the middle of China.
Yeah, well, it's so I think still they have. I think it's two countries, one system, or two systems, one
Okay.
country. It's one of those. So Macau, Hong Kong, and Taiwan are its own independent country. So they have their own government, their own currency, police force, and I think if there's like a natural disaster or war or something along those lines, then they will become considered part of China.
Okay. So
So
pretty much as long as things are good, you're on your own.
I think so. I mean, I'm
Okay.
not sure in again, I haven't been there in,
Yeah, a
almost
long
15
time.
years, but at least at the time that was the case. So Macau originally had been a Portuguese colony and China had been a British colony. So there's still influence of both, the cuisine and the culture in both places, but they are their own entities now.
Speaking of the cuisine, is Chinese food like similar to Japanese food? Like, you know, it's just like, or let me rephrase that. Is the Chinese food we eat here? Obviously, I know it's like quote unquote Americanized, right? But is it like similar or completely different?
Yeah, I mean, if you order Chinese food here, it is going to be different typically than if you were to order food like in Hong Kong or Macau or something like that. Just the dishes, the portions, the manner in which it's presented. So yeah, it's going to be. It was also interesting because like McDonald's is very popular in both Macau and Hong Kong, and a lot of what you can order is the same you would find in the United States, but they also have more localized uh, cuisine. So that was that was interesting.
I mean, yep, definitely sounds like it would be interesting. I was always very curious about that. I mean, I had read that, yeah, it is different. Like, I think I read that chop suey is more of like an American thing. And that's not really a thing there.
That I'm not sure.
Yeah, because I just like I never see actual chop suey very often in a Chinese restaurant. Very few of them, at least around here. Period. I'm in Detroit, well, suburb of Detroit,
Gotcha.
so I'm a little bit south of there. You know that I definitely that is sounds like it's a different experience than you would have here.
Yeah, it is. It was really, I would recommend if people have the opportunity to travel abroad. Obviously things have changed in the last 5 years or so with COVID, but if you have the opportunity to go abroad, I would just to experience. It was really a profound impact on me living in another country for 2 years. That could be a little extreme for some people. I think perhaps just if you can go abroad for maybe a week or a few days, that would be worthwhile.
No, I mean, hey, that's never necessarily a bad thing at all. So it says that try not to sneeze. Sorry, allergies have been killing me. PTSD, like give everybody a little bit of background on that. How that's affected you, kind of shaped a lot of things, and you're just kind of going on some of your background on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I had a ruptured brain aneurysm in 2018, and the first year of my recovery was mostly just physical. So I had the aneurysm right before I was about to board a plane. So fortunately for me, I collapsed on the jetway and first responders could get to me. And for the first year after I got out of the hospital, I needed to walk with a cane. My endurance was really low, so I needed to build up stamina. I had double vision. And then eventually, after the first year, I was able to walk without the cane. I had built up my endurance, my double vision went away. So a lot of the physical limitations began to taper off. What I didn't realize is that my emotional recovery was going to wait until the physical recovery was beginning to slow. I assumed that they would be happening at the same time. But so a lot of what I had to kind of adjust to was just a radical difference in what my life would be like. A lot of the goals that I'd had didn't seem as important anymore. My ability to make emotional connections was also blunted. So that took some time to get used to. So a lot of it was just processing the fallout from the traumatic experience. Um, that's what the PTSD, I guess, would have been, is just sort of feeling more comfortable with the fact that the way that I was going to process information was going to be different. I was really fortunate that my cognitive processing wasn't affected. Like, I have friends who have had traumatic brain injuries that are unable to go back to work. They're unable to do things for more than, an hour at a time because they just, whatever injury they sustained changed how they're able to operate.
And that's
No, I mean, they're still able to live fulfilling lives. I think that's part of what we all have this idea of what our expectations are. And sometimes you're sort of forced to revisit those expectations and manage them a little bit differently. That was the biggest revelation for me, was to find out that I could have a fulfilling life that would look differently than I had anticipated. I had hoped one day that I would be a published author who could make a living off of writing. And that didn't have, I mean, I was able to publish a book, but it didn't transform my life the way that I had anticipated. So part of what I had to do was just take a step back and revisit that and find that there were other things that perhaps I hadn't anticipated that would be worthwhile for me to find fulfilling.
there we go. My video first for a second. Yeah, as we kind of like come to I would say close or whatever. You're man, you got a lot of history behind you. Could definitely talk for a couple hours just on your experiences. I love that. I mean, especially like your background in like counseling, just kind of like teaching kids. I'm always curious about that because I'm 40. You know, never thought one day I'd be the older person in the room. And feel like I guess you never feel like you're the one that's out of touch or like I look at kids now and I'm like, okay, well, I cannot comprehend what you're trying to comprehend. So I mean, I'll help you the best I can, but I think I had told someone once, I said, the world is different for every generation. Like, my reality will be my reality till I die. My reality will always be cling to the 90s, late 80s, 90s. That's going to be my reality and kind of how I process things. Just like with they're growing up.
One one
So
one interesting thing that sort of blew my mind was so I graduated from high school in the 90s, and I remember always having a romantic view of what the 60s would have been like. And now that we're in the 2020s, the 90s will be their version of the 60s.
yeah, yeah, it's crazy because you look at all I think what it is you look at the problems that you have when you're young, right? And then you look at, and a lot of the times those problems weren't as prevalent or whatever you want to call it back in those days, right? So you're just like, man, that just seems like it'd be easier to deal with.
Sure.
Back then bullying's a big thing. Now back then, I don't know, you just kind of, I won't say just dealt with it, but you just kind of get dealt with it. You just, and not that I'm saying bullying doesn't need to be dealt with, because obviously it does, but I think to a degree we got to teach our kids not necessarily to fight, but to kind of stand up for their own individuality a little bit more, rather than going, okay, somebody's being a jerk to me, I'm gonna, I won't say I cower down, but like I'm gonna shut down and just completely walk away, and I think that hurts some of them. Not all, because some kids, that's just not in their realm of, hey, that's just not their personality. Some of these kids, that's for me, like in school, like, they're a lot more afraid to stand up for themselves. And I don't even mean by fighting. I just mean by going, hey man, that's not cool. That doesn't fly for me. I just don't think that I don't know if it's, we just don't enable it no more. We discourage it, because when I was coming up, it was, hey, if somebody's doing something crazy or anything like that, obviously bring it to our attention. But, if they're just being jerks, stand up for yourself, don't allow it. And I guess to me, I feel like that hurt, that not being there hurts a lot of kids these days. They don't, and then when they get into the workplace, they're very unsure of how to handle things, because you go from high school or home, where everybody obviously is, hey, we're about helping you, we're about caring, da 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 da. Well, in the workplace, your boss is going to go, well, I do care about how you feel, but we got to get the job done to make money. And I feel like that ill equips some children today,
Sure.
because they don't know how to handle that, and they'll be like, well, I'm getting bullied, or I'm getting, you know getting treated a certain way. And I'm like, well, if you're not hitting the mark, me being in business, I've been in the same industry 25 years. They pretty much will tell you, hey, man, shape up or ship out. And I think that we don't do a good job preparing them for that. Not like as like teachers, I just mean like a society in general. We just, and I feel like that spills over into some of these kids, because I've seen some of these clips on YouTube, how some of these kids act, and I'm like, oh, good Lord, man, my dad or my mom would have snatched me up and whooped me 10 ways from Sunday. And now it's, well, the teacher said something rude to me. Well, I get it. That don't mean we can get up and do something like that. And I see some of that. And I have no doubt it happened when, back in the day too, but I just don't feel like it was as prevalent. And I just, like I said, I just think that, kids don't get enough advice on how to handle adversity, and have done a really good job handling adversity in your life. It seems, and it's not an easy thing to do, man. That's just not, it's hard, especially with what you went through, man. You're a champion, and hopefully a lot of people just see this and go, hey, if it's possible. Not everything is I won't say like a death sentence, but not everything is like a permanent situation. You don't have to be like that forever. I mean, sometimes you can't help it, right? But not giving up, I think, is important. And that's not giving up, pushing through, and that's just obviously, you got that in you, so that's awesome. I wish, like, we could just copy that to a lot of people these days, and they'd be a little bit better off, because that society, I want to say, like, necessarily just beats them down, but just, hey, this is this, and like you're saying earlier, just gives them a label, and, well, hopefully it gets better for you at some point. And that's discouraging. I feel like that's why some of these kids get discouraged, and then they log onto social media, and social media tells them they're bad kids, and or they see just wild stuff on social media. And these days, you don't know if it's AI or not. I mean, some of these speeches, like, I'll see something that'll be like some crazy speech from a politician or whoever, and I'm like, yeah, let me check out if this is real. And like 90% of the time, it's not. If it's something that just seems like really off. So I can only imagine what some of these kids experience that we don't experience, that they keep behind just their messages that don't go on their Twitters or whatever, just between friends. I can only imagine. So, I mean, is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, this is, I feel like we've touched on a lot of really interesting things. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate it. I'll get everything, published, scripted, or not scripted, published, edited, audio and all that stuff. And I'll get you the links and everything over.
Perfect.
Okay. I appreciate everything, Andy.
Yeah, thank you so much. You too. Be well.